It is 2 in the morning, and the flight deck of USS Ronald Reagan is the loudest place on Earth. That is not a figure of speech. The sustained sound pressure level on a carrier flight deck during active flight operations peaks at approximately 150 decibels at catapult launch, a level that exceeds the threshold of immediate hearing damage by a factor that makes the safety briefing about wearing hearing protection feel like it was written for a different reality entirely. It's like at 150 decibels, sound is no longer something you hear. It is something your body absorbs. The pressure wave from an FCA-18E Super Hornet at full military power, 40 feet from where you are standing, travels through the flight suit, through the chest cavity, through the bones. Every launch is a full-body event. The aviation boatswain's mate in the yellow shirt standing at the catapult track has done this 600 times. He is 21 years old. He joined the Navy at 18. He has been doing this specific job, directing aircraft to the catapult, managing the final positioning sequence that ends with a $70 million aircraft being accelerated from 0 to 165 miles per hour in less than 3 seconds, for 2 years. Tonight he will do it 40 more times before he goes below. The aircraft carrier flight deck is the most dangerous peacetime workplace in the United States military. Not the most demanding, not the most complex. The most dangerous, measured in the category of environments where training, professionalism, and absolute attention to detail are the only difference between a routine evolution and an event that the safety officer will be writing about for the next 6 months. People die on carrier flight decks. They die from jet blast. They die from arresting cables. They die from propeller strikes, from falls overboard, from the violence of machinery operating at the extreme edge of what physics allows in a confined, wet, moving, dark environment. They also launch and recover aircraft around the clock, in sea states that would close a civilian airport, at operational tempos that the rest of the world's carrier-operating navies look at and do not attempt to replicate, because this is what they trained for. And because someone has to do it, this is what that actually looks like. The flight deck of a Nimitz or Gerald R. Ford-class carrier is 4.5 acres of non-skid coated steel, a surface texture that is simultaneously grippy enough to prevent personnel from sliding in wet conditions and abrasive enough to shred exposed skin in any fall. It is the size of 3 American football fields, angled and reconfigured to accommodate 4 catapult tracks, 4 arresting wires, aircraft parking spots for up to 90 aircraft, fuel pits, weapons handling areas, crash and salvage equipment stations, and the movement corridors that allow the deck choreography to function without constant collision. From the outside, aerial footage makes the carrier flight deck look organized. Aircraft lined in rows, crew moving with apparent purpose. The island, the control tower structure on the starboard edge, presiding over the activity with institutional calm. The reality of standing on that deck during active flight operations is something aerial footage cannot communicate. The wind is the first thing. A carrier conducting flight operations maintains a minimum wind speed over the deck, achieved by pointing the ship into the natural wind and adding ship speed to it, of approximately 30 to 40 knots across the landing threshold. 30 to 40 knots of sustained wind on a flat steel surface, combined with jet exhaust from aircraft at full power, creates a physical environment that fights every movement. Walking into the wind in a flight suit carrying equipment is work. Running, which the job occasionally requires, is a controlled fall forward. The heat is second. Jet blast deflectors, steel panels that rise from the deck surface behind the catapult track to redirect jet exhaust upward rather than across the deck. Reach surface temperatures during launch operations that will burn through a glove in sustained contact. The JP-5 jet fuel that is being pumped continuously through deck-level fuel pits to waiting aircraft smells of kerosene and something chemically sharper, a smell that permeates everything. The flight suit, the hair under the cranial helmet, the interior of the passageways below deck. The noise does not have an off switch. Between launches, the sound level drops from 150 decibels to something in the 110 to 120 range, roughly equivalent to standing next to a running chainsaw, as aircraft taxi, engines are tested, and the mechanical systems of the catapult are cycled. Then the next aircraft reaches the catapult track. The jet blast deflector rises. The holdback bar is engaged. The pilot pushes the throttle to full afterburner, and the world returns to 150 decibels for the 2 seconds of the launch stroke before the aircraft is gone, climbing away from the bow. and the deck crew is already moving to reset for the next cycle. During maximum sortie generation, the conditions that a carrier strike group in sustained combat operations would attempt to maintain. The flight deck can cycle an aircraft every 60 to 90 seconds. The crew running this cycle is not a large one by the standards of the task. The deck crew that manages launch and recovery operations consists of approximately 500 to 600 personnel per 12-hour flight cycle, divided by function, coordinated by a command hierarchy that runs from the air boss in the control tower to the yellow shirts on the catapult tracks, to the teenagers in blue jerseys, driving aircraft tractors between parking spots at 2 in the morning in conditions that would close any civilian airfield on Earth. The mechanical systems that the flight deck crew manages are among the most violent and unforgiving in any operational environment. The Catapult, EMALS on the Ford class, steam-powered C-13 on the Nimitz class, is a machine defined by controlled violence. The C-13 steam catapult builds pressure in an accumulator system over the period between launches, then releases it through a piston that runs the full length of the 300-foot track, attached to the aircraft's launch bar through a shuttle assembly. The energy released during a stroke generates forces that the aircraft structure and the crew member who has been working that track for 8 hours experience in different but equally real ways. The aircraft structure experiences 5 to 3 g of acceleration during the launch stroke, a force that has been engineered into the aircraft's design, and that the airframe can sustain across thousands of launches before accumulated fatigue creates structural concerns. The deck crew member who is standing within 20 feet of that stroke experiences the pressure wave, the steam venting, and the structural vibration of the catapult track discharging through the deck surface they are standing on. Experienced catapult crew members describe being able to feel launches through their boots. Before they can hear them, the arresting gear is a different category of mechanical violence. 4 cross-deck pendants, steel cables approximately 25 inches in diameter, are stretched across the landing area at intervals, connected through a purchased cable system to hydraulic energy absorbers below deck. When a landing aircraft catches a wire with its tailhook, the wire extends behind the aircraft as it decelerates, absorbing the kinetic energy of 50,000 pounds, moving at 150 miles per hour through hydraulic resistance. The deceleration force on the aircraft is approximately 4 g. The wire, during a trap, goes from slack to loaded with a force measured in tens of thousands of pounds in a fraction of a second. The deck crew that manages the arresting gear works in close proximity to wires under that load. The arresting wire pendant is replaced after a defined number of traps. It accumulates fatigue damage with every use, and a wire that breaks under load during a recovery operation becomes a steel cable under extreme tension, releasing catastrophically on a crowded flight deck. Wire breaks do happen. Training covers them. Nothing in a training evolution fully prepares the body for the specific sensory experience of a wire break during live operations, and the crew members who have experienced one describe it with a specificity and economy of language that suggests the memory does not fade. The jet blast deflectors, the panels that rise from the deck to redirect engine exhaust, are hydraulically operated panels weighing several tons, cycling up and down with every launch. They are operated by a crew member whose entire view of the catapult track is through a limited sight line from a control station that is designed for function rather than safety margin. The JBD operator's job is to ensure the panel is fully raised before the launch stroke begins and fully lowered before the next aircraft crosses the track. The timing margins, at maximum sortie generation rate, are measured in seconds. The jersey color system is the deck crew's language, the visual vocabulary that allows 500 people to operate in an environment too loud for voice communication, moving too fast for detail coordination, and too dangerous for any ambiguity about who is responsible for what. Yellow jerseys are the directors and catapult officers. The senior deck handlers who physically direct aircraft to their spots and to the catapult, using hand signals that every pilot must be able to read in darkness and in conditions where visibility may be compromised by exhaust and spray. Yellow shirt authority on the flight deck is absolute within their lanes. An aircraft does not move without a yellow shirt directing it. Green jerseys are the catapult and arresting gear crews, aircraft maintenance personnel, and hook runners, the crew members who physically hook the aircraft's launch bar to the catapult shuttle, who check the holdback bar engagement, who run to the aircraft's tail after a landing, to ensure the tail hook disengages cleanly from the wire. The hook runner's job, sprinting to the rear of a landed aircraft to confirm hook disengagement, is performed under the aircraft's tail, with the nose gear still rolling, on a deck surface that is wet with fuel and water, at a pace that the sortie generation rate dictates rather than that the individual's comfort level suggests. Purple jerseys fuel the aircraft. The fuel pits are deck-level connections to the carrier's aviation fuel system, and the purple shirts, called grapes, informally, run the fueling hoses that keep the air wing operational. JP-5 aviation fuel is everywhere during active flight operations. It is on the deck, in the air as vapor, on the flight suits of the crew members who handle it. The fire risk that JP-5 represents in the environment of active engines and hot exhaust systems is the reason the carrier's Dam Damage Control Organization runs continuous fire watch during flight operations, and the reason the carrier's firefighting capability is the most sophisticated of any single platform in any Navy. Red jerseys handle ordnance, the weapons that are loaded onto aircraft before strike missions. Moving bombs, missiles, and rockets on a moving deck, on personnel-driven weapons carts, in conditions of darkness and noise and wind, to aircraft whose engines are running, in a sequence that must be completed within the launch cycle timing window, is an exercise in managed risk that the ordnance handling community executes thousands of times per deployment. A dropped weapon, a fuse improperly set, an ordnance cart that gets away from its handlers in a crosswind. The failure modes of ordnance handling on a carrier flight deck are serious enough that the training pipeline for red shirts is among the most intensive in naval aviation. White jerseys are safety observers, medical personnel, and quality assurance representatives. Their presence on the flight deck is a constant reminder that the organization has learned, from events that did not go well, that someone whose specific job is to watch for the problems that task-focused crew members may not see is worth the deck space they occupy. Blue jerseys drive the aircraft tractors, the small electric vehicles that move aircraft between parking spots, to the elevator, and to the catapult when an aircraft is not under its own power. The tractor drivers are often the most junior personnel on the flight deck. They are operating heavy machinery in close proximity to aircraft worth $70 million in conditions that a commercial vehicle operator would refuse to work in at speeds and in spaces that require spatial awareness that is developed through weeks of supervised practice before the first unsupervised evolution. Brown jerseys are the plane captains, the enlisted aviation maintainers who are personally responsible for the aircraft assigned to them. The plane captain's connection to their aircraft is not organizational. It is professional and personal. They brief the pilot. They conduct the final walk-around before the launch. They are the last person the pilot sees before the catapult stroke. If something goes wrong during a mission that a pre-launch inspection should have caught, the plane captain carries that with them. If everything goes right, as it does in the overwhelming majority of cases, the plane captain does not receive particular acknowledgement for the professional standard that made the right outcome possible. If this kind of deep operational analysis is something you want more of, what these platforms actually feel like from inside, what the people running them actually experience, hit the like button and subscribe with the bell icon. There is a lot more of this coming. The fatigue architecture of a carrier deployment is not something that the sortie generation statistics in post-deployment briefings adequately capture. A carrier air wing deployment runs approximately 7 months. During that deployment, the flight deck crew operates on a cycle determined by the flight schedule, which is set by the carrier's operational commitments, not by the physiological requirements of the human beings executing it. During periods of sustained high-tempo operations, 12-hour flight cycles become 14-hour and 16-hour ones. The hot and cold cycles of flight operations and maintenance periods mean that rest, when it is available, is often taken in circumstances that do not restore the physical reserves that the work has depleted. The hearing loss statistics in the naval aviation community are a documented, long-term consequence of the acoustic environment that hearing protection partially mitigates, but does not eliminate. The cranial helmet and communication headset worn by flight deck crew reduce the ambient noise level significantly. They do not reduce it to safe levels across a career of sustained flight deck operations. The audiological profiles of experienced aviation bosun's mates after 5 years of flight deck service show measurable hearing degradation in the frequency ranges that the catapult and jet engine noise most significantly affect. The musculoskeletal injury rate on carrier flight decks is another documented consequence of the physical environment. Ifad walkdown, foreign object debris, is a daily ritual in which the entire flight deck crew walks the deck surface shoulder to shoulder, slowly, bending to pick up any debris that could be ingested by an engine or damage an aircraft. FD walkdown on a 4.5-acre deck is a procedure that the crew performs multiple times per day in whatever sea state the carrier is operating in, and the cumulative effect of bending, lifting, and moving in a wind-exposed environment on a non-skid surface produces a back injury profile that the naval medical system tracks and that the deck crew absorbs as an occupational cost. The psychological profile of the flight deck environment is less formally tracked, but equally real. The sustained alertness required, the knowledge that inattention for a moment, a misread signal, a step in the wrong direction, can produce consequences that cannot be undone, generates a stress load that experienced crew members manage through professional habituation. New crew members manage it imperfectly while developing the habituation. The quality of that development process, the mentorship of junior crew members by experienced ones, the gradual expansion of responsibility, the feedback mechanisms that allow mistakes to be corrected before they become events, is the primary variable that determines the difference between a flight deck that operates safely and one that doesn't. The combat vulnerability of the flight deck represents the sharpest contrast between the operational reality of carrier aviation and the assumption that underlies it, the flight deck is unarmored. 4.5 acres of open steel, covered with aircraft, fuel, weapons, and people, with no overhead cover and no significant passive protection against the weapons that peer adversaries have developed specifically to hit it. The carrier's active defense. The surface combatants of the strike group, the carrier's own defensive systems, the combat air patrol maintained by the air wing, is the protection. It is multiple layers of active defense between the adversary's weapon and the flight deck. When those layers hold, the flight deck is the safest large surface on any carrier, because the protection is working. When they fail, when a single anti-ship missile gets through the defensive envelope, the flight deck, during active flight operations, is the most catastrophic single target on the ship. The specific scenario is not theoretical. The 1967 USS Forrestal fire, caused by an accidental rocket ignition on the flight deck during flight operations, killed 134 sailors, wounded 161, and destroyed 21 aircraft. The fire was not caused by enemy action. It was caused by a single uncontrolled ignition event on a deck loaded with fuel and ordnance. The lessons of Forrestal were absorbed into decades of carrier damage control training and fire suppression system development. They did not change the fundamental reality that a carrier flight deck during maximum sortie generations contains the fuel, ordnance, and fragile aircraft of an entire air wing concentrated in the most exposed location on the ship. The crew members who work that deck in combat know this. They know it the way the nuclear submarine crew knows the pressure differential outside the hull, as a fact that has been rationally processed, assigned to the background of consciousness, and managed through professional focus on the immediate task. The plane captain doing the final walk-around before a strike mission launch is not thinking about what happens if the defensive envelope fails. They are checking the aircraft, doing the job correctly. Trusting the system, that trust is not naive. It is built on a training and professional development architecture that the American carrier aviation community has refined across 80 years of operation. It is built on the damage control capability that Forrestal's sacrifice improved. It is built on the strike group's defensive systems and on the professionalism of every person in the chain between the adversary's weapon and the flight deck. The operational philosophy that sustains carrier aviation and the flight deck crew at its physical center is the clearest possible statement of what the United States Navy believes about the relationship between human beings and the machines they operate. A carrier is not automatic. It is not autonomous. The most sophisticated weapon system in the American military inventory functions because 4,500 to 5,000 people are willing to do jobs that civilian occupational safety standards would not permit at hours that labor regulations would prohibit. In conditions that no shore-based equivalent would be allowed to maintain, the yellow shirt directing the aircraft to the catapult at 2 in the morning is not protected by the engineering of the ship. He is protected by his training, his attention, the professionalism of the crew members working around him, and the institutional culture of an organization that has developed its operating procedures through the hard lessons of what happens when any of those things fail. The aviation boatswain's mate who goes below after a 16-hour flight deck cycle, strips the flight suit that smells of jet fuel and hydraulic fluid, sets an alarm for 6 hours, and gets back into it the next day. They are the reason the carrier works. Not the catapult, not the radar, not the nuclear reactor. The machine is extraordinary. The people inside it are more so. The question worth considering is this. In an era of autonomous systems, unmanned aircraft, and AI-assisted strike planning, in a future where the Navy is actively developing aircraft that do not require a pilot and strike missions that do not require a flight deck crew, what happens to the institutional knowledge, the professional culture, and the human capability that the flight deck has built and sustained across 80 years of carrier aviation? The machine can be replaced by a more automated machine. Whether what the machine produces, the pilots, the deck crews, the aviation community that has defined American naval power projection for the better part of a century, can be replaced by an algorithm is a question that no procurement document has yet answered. Drop what you think in the comments.